I'm going to show you how to specify an external source. Let's get started.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian Watrous from VVork. If this is your first time here and you want to learn about automating, programming, and monitoring in VMware environments, you're in the right place. Start now by subscribing and click the bell so that you don't miss a thing. All right, we've reached the video where we're going to put it all together. If you don't know what all we're putting together because you haven't seen the previous videos, make sure you check out the playlist up there. Because this is an 8-part video. We're on video number 7. Go back to video 1 if you haven't been there. Anyways, let's put it all together. To do that, let's go into the lab. You'll recall in the previous video, we created 2 VRO actions. Those VRO actions are get fruits and get vegetable. One returns a single string, the other returns an array of strings. And the reason why we create these actions is because over in Service Broker, when we design our custom form, if we choose external source, we can point VRA at our VRO actions. And when the VRO action runs, it'll do whatever we tell it to do, and it will return dynamic content back to VRA so that Service Broker can put dynamic content into your custom form. So let's do it. All right, so again, we've got our 2 actions here in Orchestrator, but we need to go back to Service Broker now. Okay, here in Service Broker, we see the catalog, we see our blueprint. We could click request, but we haven't changed the definition of the custom form. We need to go back to content and policies and change our custom form. So back to content and policies. Once again, we'll click on content. And again, we'll click the triple dot button for our blueprint so that we can customize its form. And in here, you'll recall the groceries tab is where we've got our text field and our drop-down list. And we're going to slightly change their definitions. So currently, if I select the select a vegetable text field, if we go over to the values field, you'll recall we hard-coded tomato as its default value. Tomato is a string. That string is our default value. But what we'd like to do at times is to have the value, the default value of a text field, be dynamically generated or dynamically calculated or programmatically or however you want to say it. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to hook up select a vegetable to the get vegetable VRO action that we created in the previous video. So let's do that. Instead of hard coding tomato, I'm going to expand default value for select a vegetable. And instead of a constant value such as tomato, we're going to instead choose external source. Now you'll notice that we've got choices beyond just those 2, but for our purposes now, we need to choose external source. That's what's going to allow us to connect the custom form, specifically this text field, to our VRO action. So I've selected external source, and now what I need to do is type the name or a portion of the name of the action, the VRO action, not of ABX action, but the VRO action that I want to call. So I'm going to type get vegetable. Again, I don't have to type the whole thing. I just type a portion of it, and I select it. Now, very important point. Selecting this would be exactly the right thing to do in this case, but I want to illustrate a point that's very important. Obviously, if we're going to select the action to call, I need to type the right name. If I type the name wrong, it's going to come back and say, you typed something. I can't match that against anything. There's no VRO action called that. So this error message is obvious in this case because I have blunderously mistyped the name of the action. But notice that I have just typed get fruits. You'll recognize that from the previous video. That's the other VRO action that we defined. Get fruits is a totally valid thing to type here in terms of the name because it is a VRO action. But get fruits is not being returned by this search in this case because the default value expects a single string. Get vegetable returns a single string. Get fruits does not. Since get fruits does not return a string, it instead returns an array of strings, then it does not match. The name matches something, but the signature of it, its return value doesn't match. That's why this message says no matching values found. Conversely, later on, if we're working with a drop-down list and we're supposed to, in that case, look for an action that returns an array of strings, then if we picked get vegetable, which only returns one string, we'd run into the same thing. So as you work with external source selections like we're doing here, and you do the search, you need to be cognizant of what you're doing. It's not enough just to type the right name. You got to make certain that if you're setting up the action for a default value, you need an action that returns a single string. If you're setting up the action that's going to get called for a drop-down list, the action needs to be one that returns an array of strings. All right, I think I've hammered that point home enough. Let's type get vegetable again. So there's get vegetable. Notice it reminds me of the name of the package. I can select either of these. It's the same thing. This is all one selection. And it reminds me here what I selected. So I selected the get vegetable VRO action that resides in the info.vvork.food package, and I'm done. Now, if I wanted to, I could set up constraints and so forth so that I can still force the user to type something valid. Just because I'm supplying this default value doesn't mean the user isn't going to change the value to something else. So I can still do constraints of various sorts. I haven't actually showed you this, so let me briefly let you take a peek. We can talk about these different choices in some future video, but there you go. There's your peek. Make certain that you subscribe and hit the notification bell button so that you'll know when I release that video one day in the future. But for right now, we've set the default value for our select a vegetable text field to the output of the VRO action called get vegetable. So now, if we want to select a fruit, we select the drop-down list. Again, right now, the drop-down list is defined as a static, hard-coded list of apple, banana, and cherry. What I'm going to do, though, is go over to values. And I can define a default value just like before, but that needs to be a single string. If I'm going to call an action that's going to pick the default value, I would need to make certain it's a VRO action that returns a single string. But value options, the place we go to set what's actually going to show up in the drop-down list, that needs us, if we choose to do an external source, value options needs us to pick a VRO action that returns an array of strings. So I'm going to choose external source. And as I described before, if I mistakenly type get vegetable, it's not going to find it, because even though get veggie is a matching substring of get vegetable, even though that's a valid name, it returns the wrong type. On the other hand, if we say get fruits, that returns an array of strings. That is valid. I'm going to select that. And again, I could set up constraints and so forth, but we've got we've done it. All we need to do now is scroll down, click the save button. Then, okay, let's take off our custom form designer hat. And instead, what we're going to do is put on our hat as an end user. We're going to go back to the catalog. We're going to go back to our blueprint, back to our request button, click request. We see the same things on the first page that we saw before, but let's see what we see under the Groceries tab. We have our text field and our drop-down list. But notice that the text field is no longer defaulting to what was it before? Tomato. Instead, it says zucchini because that's what the action, the VRO action called getVegetable, has been programmed to return. And the select a fruit drop-down list is once again defaulting to banana because I left that default value there. But let's see what else is in the drop-down list.
It takes a ridiculous amount of time to create these videos. Please take 2 seconds and like this one.
The drop-down list has got apple, it's got banana, and cherry, and date, and eggplant, and fig, and so forth. So that is a programmatically defined list of choices. It was automatically generated, dynamically, programmatically, whatever word you want to use. Now, admittedly, let's go back to Orchestrator real quickly here. Admittedly, if we go look at our actions such as get fruits, admittedly, this code here is not looking a whole business-like. In an actual action that you would define for your business, you might say things like return a list of data stores, but only return data stores that have at least a certain amount of disk free space. So there would be some sort of business logic that you would encode into the action. And the action, instead of just generating this array of strings, might do things like go to a database to get the values, or make a REST call to something in your infrastructure, such as your IPAM, your IP address management system, or what have you. There's tons of things you can do. I have intentionally left the business logic out of this example, but I know where you can see a great example that does have business logic in it.
In the next video, I'm going to give you more resources to learn about dynamic custom forms in VRA 8.